Hi, I'm Abby, I have a lot of records, and this is a very special episode of Vinyl Monday. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is usually the series where once a week I sit down and talk about a classic album I love. But this week is very different and very special. This is the Season 2 finale of Vinyl Monday. As you could probably tell from the runtime of this video, I won't know what that will be until it's done. My best ballpark is around 60 minutes. I like to do big stuff to celebrate, but if deep dives aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds, both here on my channel and over on my Instagram. The title might seem strange, but it's true. This week's album doesn't exist. There are a couple approximations out there, but the real thing has never and will never see the light of day. But Abby, is it even possible to cover an album that doesn't exist on Vinyl Monday? Your guess is as good as mine. We'll just have to find out. So, without further ado, the final album of Vinyl Monday Season 2 is SMiLE by the Beach Boys. Congrats to those who guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. That's where I post my hints to what next week's album is gonna be. I host polls over there. I post other fun behind the scenes stuff. It's a good time. So if SMiLE doesn't exist, then what the hell do I have here? That's what I asked myself when I pulled this out of a box of albums sent to my P.O. box. I turned to the authority of Beach Boys knowledge here on YouTube, Sir Giggins, for help. And this is the lowdown of what he told me. This is one of the first, if not the first, honest-to-goodness SMiLE bootleg ever made. It's on one disc, in a single sleeve. There's liner notes on a separate sheet in here. B-roll Abby will be showing you all of that. The first SMiLE bootlegs, if you could call something that comes from an official source a bootleg? That kind of defeats the purpose though. Let's just call it a leak. Were cassette tapes that Dennis Wilson would just hand out to people, but this was the first record you could find if you knew where to look. The album cover you see here features an illustration by Frank Holmes. We're gonna see some other interpretations of SMiLE art later in the video, but this is the art we most closely associate with the SMiLE project. Over the many, many years of SMiLE lore, there's been a revolving door of cast and crew working on this project, but here are the major players for this part of the video. Of course, you have the Beach Boys, comprised of the brothers Wilson, Brian, Carl, and Dennis, their cousin, Mike Love, and their friend from school, Al Jardine. Brian Wilson really spearheaded this project, serving as composer and executive producer. The other major player we have in this story is lyricist Van Dyke Parks. Those are the names you should keep in mind heading into Act 1 of the story of SMiLE. Roll transition. A disclaimer before we head much farther into this video, this will be far from a comprehensive history of SMiLE. That would be literally impossible to do. None of my videos are comprehensive histories. Unless you're talking about Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs, that one absolutely was. I'll really be focusing on the history that is most important to the music we hear on these iterations of SMiLE. So let's begin with this. There's a conundrum between great artists and great record labels. Great record labels repeat the formula. They find what works and they crank it out. Great artists take the risks. Labels do not like when artists take risks because they're spending label money and there's a chance they might not make it back. That's the conundrum we encounter with Pet Sounds. Our story today starts with the Pet Sounds sessions and a little song called Good Vibrations. Brian Wilson comes up with some wacky stuff that only he could come up with, Mike Love adds lyrics and the hook. Now, Capitol Records really liked Good Vibrations and wanted it on the album, but Brian held off. He had some bigger plans. In the UK, Pet Sounds was a hit. Audiences devoured it, but artists really worshipped this thing, namely the Beatles. In the United States, on the other hand, things did not go as planned. It breaks the top 10, but it wasn't the #1 record Capitol was hoping for. It misses out on Grammys, confuses critics, and divides the fan base. The fans were, for the most part, used to Surfing Cars and Girls, so when they brought home Pet Sounds, the resounding reaction was, huh? Brian saw the discrepancy between how Pet Sounds went over in the UK and US, how artists saw its brilliance but audiences and the label didn't, and it lights a fire under his ass. He wants to write something that will blow everyone away, something too big to ignore. The success of Good Vibrations as a single in October of '66, the most psych thing the Beach Boys had done thus far, gave 24-year-old Brian the confidence to start working on his Pocket Symphony, what he hopes will be the greatest album ever made, and he's not shy at all about this claim. Growing up, Brian was inspired by hearing composers like George Gershwin around the house. He was especially fond of Rhapsody in Blue. And the great writer-composer duo of his youth was Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein. Bry was the Rodgers of this project. All he needed was a Hammerstein. Enter another youngster, 22-year-old Van Dyke Parks. Brian and Van Dyke met at a party at Terry Melker's house in 1965. Parks looks like a Victorian orphan, but writes like a poet. Brian calls him up shortly after the release of Pet Sounds. Both were optimists at heart and wanted to write something uplifting. After all, the 60s were a scary and confusing time to be a young adult in America. They wanted to write the story of America, but to have it be something that spoke to its greatness. Youth, freedom, coming of age, opportunity, exploring America. The good guys beating the bad guys in the end. They wanted a snappy, happy title, something deceptively simple for the most ambitious project Brian has conceived thus far. SMiLE is born. The first song they wrote together was a song about good guys and bad guys, heroes and villains. They weren't sure if this thing was gonna work. Van Dyke had a lot of words, but it fit. And so did they. No one was in charge, no one was the sidekick. It was the two of them. Van Dyke described the dynamic as simple, uncomplicated, collaborative heaven. SMiLE also had its roots in spirituality. Bry was a spiritual guy. He wanted to write music people could live to as well as pray to. He was endlessly fascinated by the universe, a real God is everywhere and everything and music is prayer kind of guy. Yeah, it's safe to say he had some huge ideas for this. And he was using the studio as an instrument, man! Yeah, I realize this has become a meme in the Beach Boys fan community, but it's true. I talked about this in my Pet Sounds video. It applies to SMiLE as well. To execute a project this big, Brian had to work and think on a whole different scale. What people mean by the using the studio as an instrument thing is nothing was recorded in one go. Bits and pieces of SMiLE were written, bits and pieces were recorded and then pieced together later. As a session player, it can be pretty difficult to execute the components if you can't synthesize the final product. Brian knew this and was accommodating. He might not have always been able to explain what it was he wanted through words, but he could always fall back on sounding it out or just demonstrating for the player. We see this come up in an anecdote a little later. The driving forces behind SMiLE that I feel like are left out of the conversation purely for how wacky it could get. The elements of spontaneity, humor, joy, and fun. It wasn't uncommon for Brian to have his players acting out the songs, you know, assigning people barnyard animals, that's totally normal. Bringing in unconventional items like wood blocks, hammers, and other tools. The importance of eating vegetables became a fixture in Brian's life at this time, which is, of course, where we get the song Vegetables. Sometime in April of '67, while in the US to visit his girlfriend, Jane Asher, Paul McCartney drops by Brian Wilson's house.
Where are you? That's White Album, which means this is Magical Mystery Tour. Boop boop.
Two things happen on this hangout. First, Paul chews some celery for vegetables, and second, Paul asks to borrow a pen and a piece of paper. This is where he would sketch out the concept for Magical Mystery Tour. There was one day where the crew came into the studio and Brian had all of the furniture replaced with yoga mats. He wanted to get into exercise, but admitted he was too lazy. So relatable. The reason there were so many antics during these sessions isn't because Brian was losing it, it's because he was having fun. He was the ringleader to get everybody in the pool, even when it was cold out, and he would just sit on the side in one of the chairs wrapped in a blanket. He wanted an indoor tent to be sort of a meeting and brainstorming spot, so he put one up in his house with gorgeous fabric and pillows and blankets. Everyone loved the tent idea and really wanted it to work. It's a misconception that, you know, his crew and his session musicians were all kind of side-eyeing him through the project. No, they were in on the fun too. They really wanted the tent to work, but the first time they got in it, they all decided to smoke hash. And they accidentally hotboxed it. No one thought to put in a fan. They only used the tent once. Maybe the grand poobah of SMiLE Sessions antics, my personal favorite of the bunch, the sandbox. Brian had 1,000 pounds of fine white sand brought into his living room and dumped it all out around a Steinway piano. Look, I am all for doing whack shit in the name of creative pursuits, I mean, hello. But if I were his wife and I got home and there was 1,000 pounds of sand in my living room that I probably just vacuumed that morning, divorce. But you know, maybe the sandbox being especially productive was some kind of consolation. Heroes and Villains, Cabin Essence, Wonderful, and Surf's Up were all written there. But too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. For one, LSD was a lot stronger in 1967 than it is today. I am very thankful it's weakened over the years, personally, because if you did even a lick too much of it in the 60s, it could seriously fuck you up. But Abby, Brian never did much of the SID, and that is true. But if there's one thing you should know about doing psychedelics, it's that you shouldn't do them when you're not doing well. Brian was anxious enough about this project, and whatever he was or wasn't doing at this time, we will never know for sure, only heightened that. It actually got him to feeling pretty paranoid, leading to maybe the other most famous antic of the SMiLE sessions, the Mrs. O'Leary's cow incident. I'm just gonna read this one right from this anthology. Shake It Up, Great American Writing on Rock and Pop from Elvis to Jay-Z. This was assigned as a textbook in one of my college writing classes, and it's proven to be an amazing resource to have moving through this whole Vinyl Monday thing. Okay, so, Jules Siegel, Goodbye Surfing, Hello God. Walking into the control room with the answers to all questions such as this, question of hipness, for context, was Brian Wilson himself, wearing a competition striped surfer's t-shirt, tight white duck pants, pale green bowling shoes, and a red plastic toy fireman's hat. Everyone was wearing bright red plastic toy firemen's helmets. Brian's cousin and production assistant Steve Korthoff was wearing one, his wife Marilyn and her sister Diane, Brian's secretary, were also wearing them, and so was a once dignified writer from the Saturday Evening Post who'd been following Brian around for 2 months. Talk about commitment to the bit. Using a variety of techniques ranging from vocal demonstration to actually playing the instruments, he taught each musician his part. A gigantic fire howled out of the massive studio speakers in a pounding crash of pictorial music that summoned up visions of roaring, windstorm flames, falling timbers, mournful sirens, and sweating firemen, building into a peak and cracking off into fading embers as a single drum turned into a collapsing wall and the fire engine cellos dissolved and disappeared. "When did he write this?" asked an astonished pop music producer who'd wandered into the studio. "This is really fantastic, man. This is unbelievable. How long have you been working on it?" "About an hour," answered one of Brian's friends. "I'm gonna call this Mrs. O'Leary's Fire, and I think it might just scare a whole lot of people." As it turns out, however, Brian Wilson's Magic Fire music is not going to scare anybody, because nobody other than the few people who heard it in the studio will ever get to listen to it. A few days after the record was finished, a building across the street from the studio burned down, and, according to Brian, there was also an unusually large number of fires in Los Angeles. Afraid that his music might in fact turn out to be Magic Fire music, Wilson destroyed the master. This moment in most conventional retellings of the SMiLE story is cited as the moment Brian lost it, but I don't think that's true. I don't think he ever really lost it. Did it freak him out? Absolutely. He was a superstitious guy. It would have freaked me the hell out too. But I do think that this was the inflection point where things stopped being fun and started getting real. Despite what the mythology will tell you, the Mrs. O'Leary's cow incident was not the thing that made Brian pull the plug on SMiLE. It was a lot more gradual. In February of '67, the Beatles released their single Strawberry Fields Forever in promotion of their upcoming record, Sgt. Pepper's, which was heavily inspired by Pet Sounds. Brian hears Strawberry Fields and he thinks, fuck, they've done effortlessly what I've been grinding for months to do. This shakes his confidence a little bit. Heroes and Villains is released as a single in July to buy some time before SMiLE is supposed to be released. It did not go over well. It was strange. It made no sense outside of the context of SMiLE. The listeners were confused. Jimi Hendrix called it psychedelic barbershop music, which I feel like would be a high compliment, but apparently it wasn't back then. And the dynamics within the Beach Boys have been shifting. Through Pet Sounds, the rest of the Beach Boys and their team were like, I don't know if this is gonna work, but Carl was Brian's biggest cheerleader. His big brother was his favorite person in the world, so if his big brother believed in Pet Sounds, he did too. Through SMiLE, that advocate was Dennis. Now, there'd been this media campaign going on for years, since, I think, 1965, painting Brian as the genius behind the Beach Boys. That campaign has lasting effects today, to the extent that it's probably subconsciously affected my writing of this video. But when you're the other Beach Boys, and you feel like your contributions are being devalued by this campaign, pair that with Brian staying behind to work on this big amorphous thing while you go out on tour, and feelings can get complicated. As SMiLE dragged on with less and less of a sense of direction or purpose, the Beach Boys came back from tour to find this huge puzzle in so many pieces that came together in a picture they couldn't see themselves in. Couple that with the stress of forming Brother Records, and I think this is what made Brian slam the brakes. Labels breathing down his back? Fine. Been there, done that. Dad hates it? Whatever, that adds more fuel to the fire. Oh my god, no pun intended. Magic Fire music? That's worrying, but we can push through that. His brothers and bandmates no longer believing in the vision? That's something a sentimental, sensitive, lifelong people pleaser can't get past. SMiLE is shelved. But the label still needs something to put out by the end of the year, and that was SMiLE was released in September of 1967. It featured a handful of songs from the scrapped SMiLE project. Heroes and Villains, Vegetables, Wonderful, Wind Chimes, and Good Vibrations. Fans must have been baffled by SMiLE. They got Good Vibrations as a single in October of '66, a really fucking good single, arguably the best one the Beach Boys ever put out. The hype for SMiLE is building and building and building until you get this? It's a fine album. Good, even. The Beach Boys are doing some real, almost avant-garde stuff with this one, but it's a question with no answer. The Beach Boys move on from this pretty quickly, releasing Wild Honey in December of 1967. Brian steps back from the Beach Boys even more, and in turn, steps back from the rest of his life, for circumstances not entirely within his control. Aside from what's on SMiLE, there's SMiLE material scattered across the Beach Boys' discography. See this compilation that has Heroes and Villains on it, and 2020 that has Our Prayer and Cabanescence. There's cult classic Surf's Up in '72, but after that it all just goes quiet. Dennis hands out those cassette bootlegs, other bootlegs are made. Brian would shirk any and all conversation surrounding SMiLE. He cited it as his life's greatest failure. Over the years, the Beach Boys become something entirely unrecognizable from Brian's vision. Fucking Kokomo. Dennis passes tragically, then Carl. All the while, SMiLE becomes perhaps the greatest of all rock and roll myths. Until the early 2000s. By now, Brian had spent some years building a solo career. Two wonderfully encouraging and positive forces have entered his life: his wife, Melinda Wilson, and his bandmate, Darian Sahanaja. Brian and his concert band had been performing Pet Sounds for years. At some point, the question of new material comes up. By working through his trauma, it seems Brian realized the only way out of this would've, could've, should've black hole was through. Darian acted as secretary through this process, helping Bry sift through song fragments and reverse engineer things that had been lost to the sands of time. The crew committed to working on one song a day. No pressure to do more, but not a day would go by where nothing was done. All this work was leading up to a concert date on February 20th, 2004 at Royal Albert Hall. Bry found having a date set in stone was a great motivator. Albert Hall goes off without a hitch. The material is received really well. This show was the final push needed to mend Brian's broken heart, and it was the green light to put SMiLE to tape. This record would feature his touring band plus the Stockholm Strings and Horns. A whole team of producers and engineers would work under Brian's direction. Bob Ludwig would master the record. Even Van Dyke Parks came back to write some more lyrics. One thing I want to make note of surrounding production, the fact that Brian treated all of his session players so well. You see it in the beautiful Dreamer documentary made to promote this recording of SMiLE. He remembered all of the Wrecking Crew's names and where they sat in the studio all those years later. He was so accommodating to them and his current band, and I feel that speaks volumes to the kind of creator he is. Another thing I want to make note of is that I genuinely think Mrs. O'Leary's cow is fucking cursed. Why? While Brian's band was rehearsing it one morning, before he'd come in for the day, thank God, the power in the studio went out. You can't make this shit up! At the end of it all, in September of 2004, 37 years after the intended release of SMiLE, we got this. The Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE track listing goes as follows. Opening up disc 1, we have Our Prayer with G, followed by Heroes and Villains. Then Roll Plymouth Rock. Next, Barnyard. Then Old Master Painter with You Are My Sunshine. And side 1 closes with Cabin Essence. Opening up side 2, we have Wonderful, followed by Song for Children. Then Child is Father of the Man, and disc 1 closes with Surf's Up. Opening up disc 2, we have I'm in Great Shape with I Wanna Be Around and Workshop, followed by Vegetables, then On a Holiday, next Wind Chimes, then Mrs. O'Leary's Cow, and In Blue Hawaii, and side 3 closes with Good Vibrations. On side 4, rounding out the album, we have alternate mixes of Heroes and Villains, Cabin Essence, On a Holiday, and Wind Chimes. Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE was released in February of 2004, and I can only imagine what it must have been like to be a Beach Boys fan when this thing was finally released. The hype was building for the better part of 4 decades, and suddenly it's here. It's here, and you can go to a store and buy it. You can hold SMiLE in your hands. You can put SMiLE on your turntable. You can spend money on SMiLE. I spent $125 on this! Critics lost their minds just as much as the fans did. One of my favorite people in the world, Robert Christgau, he was not about the whole SMiLE thing back in the 60s. And he had some surprisingly nice things to say about Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE. Anchored by deft quotes and thematic repetitions, SMiLE is beautiful and funny, goofily grand. It's looser and messier than Sgt. Pepper, and one suspects always would have been. Later, he hits the nail on the head describing the dichotomy of Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE. Wilson's voice has deepened and coarsened irreparably. Although he hits the notes, he can't convey the innocence SMiLE's content seems to demand, but he can convey commitment and belief. Belief that his young, bonkers self, hold up, he stole my catchphrase! Composed a work that captured possibilities now nearly lost to history. SMiLE proves that those possibilities are still worth pursuing. Considering the decades of hype, it is nothing short of a goddamn miracle Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE lived up to it. Brian and his team had to have sighed the biggest sigh of relief in the recorded history of ever. Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE is the iteration of SMiLE that's closest to Brian's vision as of 2004. However, this is not the closest iteration to an intended 1967 SMiLE. In October of 2011, after a year and a half of behind-the-scenes work, the Beach Boys released this. A compilation of the SMiLE Sessions archives. Some bits and bobs were recorded later on, but the vast majority of this material was put to tape between the spring of '66 and late '67. And like the assembly of Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE, the SMiLE Sessions fragments were assembled into full songs for this release. Now it's important to note there were bootlegs doing stuff like this before. Purple Chick is basically a proto-SMiLE Sessions. Brian lobbied hard for the SMiLE Sessions to mirror Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE's track listing, and for the most part, it does. This was also issued in mono per Brian's request. It's funny though, not only did this package render stuff like Purple Chick obsolete, it also kind of negated the need for Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE, in some fans' eyes at least. My view has shifted from this since listening to both of these. We'll get to that in the next chapter of the video. Big fat disclaimer, the full SMiLE Sessions came in a Mondo release, this huge box set that runs for like $600 today. There are a lot of tracks, song fragments, alternate takes, demos, skits where Brian falls into a piano, and we'll never totally know how these were supposed to fit into SMiLE. So it's important to distinguish that I just have the core SMiLE Sessions album here. It's all we really need to talk about for the purpose of this video. The SMiLE Sessions track listing goes as follows. Opening up disc 1, we have Our Prayer followed by G. Then Heroes and Villains. Next, Do You Like Worms with the subtitle Roll Plymouth Rock. Then I'm in Great Shape, followed by Barnyard. Next, The Old Master Painter / You Are My Sunshine, and side 1 closes with Cabinescence. Opening up side 2, we have Wonderful, followed by Look with the subtitle Song for Children. Then Child is Father of the Man, and disc 1 closes with Surf's Up. Opening up disc 2, we have I Wanna Be Around / Workshop, followed by Vegetables. Then Holidays, followed by Wind Chimes. Next, The Elements Fire with the subtitle Mrs. O'Leary's Cow, followed by Love to Say Dada, and side 3 closes with Good Vibrations. And on side 4, we have You're Welcome, stereo mixes of Vegetables, Wind Chimes, a stereo backing track of Cabinescence with outtakes, and the album closes with what is essentially a demo of Surf's Up. This is what we hear in Beautiful Dreamer when they're talking about this song. The legacy of SMiLE and all of its iterations stand as a monumental undertaking that was never quite followed through upon. It's the most mythologized would-be album in rock and roll history. So, what do I think of SMiLE? Hi. No, that's my water. Hi. Hi. You can be in here if you're very quiet. If you lay down? Do you want to lay down? All right. We're just gonna... Okay. Yeah, my dog is in here. He's probably gonna be in here for another 15-20 minutes before he either sleeps or gets bored and leaves, or I have to remove him. So normally this is the chapter of the video where I review the album. I comment on its significance to the artist's discography, its significance to me, I give a track-by-track breakdown, and I make my overarching conclusion. However, as you've probably caught on to by this point, this ain't no normal vinyl f***ing Monday. By nature of the content of this video, we have to do things differently. I decided to write this video from the middle out, starting with this chapter and writing the rest afterwards. Every day for over a month, I listened to one song on Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE, then the same song as it appears on the SMiLE Sessions. I put each version head to head, compared and contrasted, and picked the recording I liked best. I also threw versions of these songs that appeared on other albums into the mix for shits and giggles, because at this point, why the hell not? Going in, the SMiLE Sessions had ingrained itself into my everyday listening long ago. I listen to this thing when I'm waking up in the morning, when I'm getting ready for my day, taking my dog for a walk, when I shower. This thing is a part of my life and has been for some time. And before writing this video, I had never heard Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE front to back. So here we go. This is my first reaction to SMiLE versus SMiLE. Starting with... The version we hear on the SMiLE Sessions is pretty much the version we hear on 2020, just with a different, crisper mix. And this is the version I've been using to censor my swears for the entire history of this channel, so I think you know which one I've always preferred. I like this open vowel beginning with the wider vowel at the end, and the baritone and bass sound on this performance is light. It favors the really high tenor. Right out of the gate, the Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE version is very different. We have different vowel sounds throughout, wider in the beginning and darker at the end. This arrangement, or maybe it's just the mix, is a lot heavier on the baritone end, and whatever the hell time sig this is in, it's different than SMiLE sessions. We have more spaces between phrases. My verdict for this first song, SMiLE sessions. Next up, G. On Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE, this is the same song as Our Prayer, so on this day I just listened to both. If Our Prayer was the overture, then G is the curtain rising. We have this old TV set / radio sound that bursts into the heroes and villains bit. I can hear the female vocals in the mix on those do you wannas as they swing above and below that heroes and villains part. The SMiLE Sessions version is very different from the cleaned up album version we just heard. No vocal effects, just right at you from the very beginning. I want to point out the first major difference we've had between these two versions of the album. The beginning of G on this record goes do 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 do. Over here we had do 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 do. They threw in an extra do. At least one. If you've been here for any amount of time, you'll know my math isn't great. We have more of a swing happening on SMiLE Sessions because those vocalizations are different. This runs a lot faster. Because it runs a lot faster, we rush through those dynamics between do you wanna and heroes and villains. The trombone bit fades out into nothing, leaving this long pause at the end, disrupting our flow into the next song. My verdict for this one is Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE. This song is delightfully weird. It's got the strangest structure. I can't think of another song that's structured like this. I mean, I can actually. It's Good Vibrations. But I can't think of anything that isn't Beach Boys. God, this one is wordy as hell. Those are a lot of words to spit out. Beginning with the first released version, Smiley Smile. I like that the keys are so prominent, but that organ lingering right there feels a little claustrophobic. Seeing as it's got two huge chunks missing, the cantina section and the outro, I can safely put this at the bottom of my ranking. Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE. G fades right into heroes and villains with that horn crescendo. The backing vocals are very consonant forward on this recording. I think that was to help an aged Brian out. Here we have the first appearance of the line that I think of when I think this song. You're under arrest! Like, this song is so weird, and that exclamation is just the icing on the cake. With SMiLE Sessions, we have a similar sound to Smiley Smile, but two key differences. Number one, it's got the cantina movement, and number two, the organ isn't there. I love both these choices. The song is a little freer to move without those keys. This Heroes and Villains ends with the motif from G. This one ends with a motif from Surf's Up. One of the cool things about SMiLE is how insular it is, how every idea comes back around at some point. However, I think it's a little early to be casting our gaze as far out as Surf's Up. The trombone is a better fit going into our next track. My verdict, SMiLE Sessions. Don't know why Do You Like Worms was ever a title. Probably never will. I didn't think any version was gonna beat the SMiLE Sessions recording. This is a weird favorite of mine, but wow. This was like I heard the song for the first time all over again. I don't always appreciate the finished lyrics on this record, as you'll probably see a little later in this section, but these worked. The ship bell makes the atmosphere, and the woo sliding down so far at the end makes it dark and unsettling. On the SMiLE Sessions version, we have lyrics missing. These lyrics were written a lot later on, it seems. You still get some of the storyline from the instrumentation. We're crossing the ocean on the Mayflower to Plymouth Rock, but if you don't know that lore, you're gonna need the lyrics. Verdict, Brian Wilson presents SMiLE. Oh God, I was dreading this one. Can I pick neither? This is maybe my least favorite song on SMiLE. It's the silliest song on both of these albums. It doesn't have much of a purpose to the narrative aside from being silly, but it does represent the element of fun that was so tantamount to the making of SMiLE. I won't be spending any more time than I need to talking about a song where humans are making animal noises, but I will say everyone was a lot more committed to the bit on the Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE recording. Old Master Painter / You Are My Sunshine is another shorty whose versions are very similar across albums. Brian Wilson's does that radio effect thing again. The strings slide down like they do at the end of RPR. Roll Plymouth Rock! Oh my god, okay. There are so many abbreviations in these notes right now that I'm having to rack my brain to figure out what is what. Anyway, it's like a wilting sunflower. SMiLE sessions, though, we have present tense vocals for the You Are My Sunshine part. The wood blocks stick out to me, the sax is a little sloppier, groovier, it feels more comfortable here. And we have a whole other section rounding this song out, though I will say it does make that trombone slide feel a little out of place. As much as I love the past tense version of this song, You Were My Sunshine is such a great fit for the overall mood of SMiLE, I'm gonna have to go SMiLE sessions for the back half. On the Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE performance of Cabanescence, the percussion is really prominent. Try saying that 5 times fast. There's this beautiful centrifugal force on this very circular group vocal, but it's a little drowned out by the instrumentation and the bottom vocals. I love the crescendo at the end. It's a perfect way to round out side 1. Damn, we fit this much on side 1? With the SMiLE Sessions version, we get different inflections on the harmonica firstly. Why do I love the doing doings here? In my opinion, there is a much better blend between the vocals and instruments. I can appreciate everything that's going on. But why is that one woodblock so loud? This version proves you don't need such an obvious transition into every track. The loose theme is somehow just enough for this thing to be held together. 2020 is the one record that I don't have in this bunch, and this version is pretty much the same as the SMiLE sessions. The 2020 vocals were actually used here. My verdict, SMiLE sessions. Wonderful. When I heard this song in Beautiful Dreamer, I cried. It had never moved me like that before, and until this day, it hadn't moved me quite like that since. Lyrically, I'm reminded of Caroline No, a man meeting his first love again after some time and mourning the loss of her youth. This song is a lot more sympathetic to the girl, the inner child. We gain some insight on the things she falls back on in heartbreak. SMiLE Sessions stays true to the Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE formula, French horn and all. For Smiley Smile, oh wow, this is an entirely different song. Hi, Carl. This recording has a murky underwater sound that gradually rises to the surface. A lot softer of a feel overall. And oh my god, the back half of this song is totally different. We get the heroes and villains motif again. It gets a little surreal with the chatter through the bridge and a little weird with that whisper. My verdict? Smiley Smile. Maybe this is a flaming hot Beach Boys take, maybe it's bias as this version is so new to me, but the Smiley version is fascinating. Look/Song for Children. This is one of my favorite tunes on SMiLE, so I was really excited for this. Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE, we have a transition right from Wonderful, and we have a full set of lyrics. There's the introduction of a new motif we are going to hear a lot of through the rest of this record, and a similar sense of whimsy from Barnyard, although this is a lot more tolerable to me. The biggest difference to the SMiLE Sessions version is that there are no lyrics here. Just occasional murmurs of child, father to the man. This SMiLE Sessions version makes me wonder, do we really need the lyrics to feel the childlike wonder that the instrumentation conveys just fine on its own? Though it's technically incomplete, it still services the greater narrative of SMiLE, so I think I'm gonna have to go SMiLE Sessions. Child is father of the man is another one of my favorite moments on SMiLE, but the Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE version, this really took me by surprise. Such a surprise that I only made it 14 seconds in. I timed it before stopping and having to start the song over. I couldn't believe what a difference I was hearing. It sounds so full. The percussive chugs of the surf guitar under keys and a wash of drums. There's echo. There's reverb. This was such different instrumentation than I was used to, and then it burst into the vocal arrangement that I was used to. More lyrics, of course, and this set of lyrics helped with the theme of SMiLE. I wrote down here, easy my child, it's just enough to believe. Out of the wild into what you can't conceive. I wonder what it says in the Gita about accosting your neighbors. I want to accost the trash guy though, he's cool. The sleigh bells feel like a callback to God Only Knows and the Pet Sounds era. The piano motif returns, beautiful string and French horn outro. All of what I heard here made it glaringly obvious that the SMiLE Sessions version was a song fragment, and I never would have known that otherwise. It does have those great booming drums that I love hearing on a Beach Boys record. The vocals are perkier because there's not quite so much happening behind them, but I can't believe I just accepted this version as complete until now. Verdict, far and away, Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE.
The diamond necklace play 2.
Here it is. The moment I've been waiting for this entire video, Surf's Up. Starting with the Surf's Up version. This solo vocal feels so naked and vulnerable. Usually robust harmonies feel like they're hiding in the corner. When Brian comes in, it feels like we're being visited by a ghost. The child is father of the man motif makes no sense here without any of the rest of SMiLE. This version of Surf's Up feels like an orphan child. Next, Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE. This is a confident vocal delivery from Brian. You can tell he really cherishes and believes in this song. Jesus, the harmony at Canvas the Town and Brush the Backdrop. This is the first time I've ever heard that, and it's stunning. A choke of grief, heart, heart and die. Beyond belief, a broken man too tough to cry. I really just want to leave that line there. The music hall, a costly bow. The music all is lost for now. Jesus, those two feel like self-fulfilling prophecies. Next, the studio version on SMiLE Sessions. This was the first version of the song I'd ever heard. It fucks me up that Brian could sing higher than me and I'm a woman. His falsetto was spun gold. It's worth noting that the Bygone Bygone that appears on this song is an outtake from the Surf's Up sessions in '71. I love how the tempo of this song ebbs and flows like a wave, and hold the fucking phone, is that a day in the life? Just hold on. Let me play this for you. What? Lastly, the solo piano version. For all intents and purposes, I'll be calling this a demo, because that's pretty much what it is. This is the magic of artists at work. A half-carved sculpture. It reminds me of my favorite scene from Love and Mercy, where Paul Dano is Brian at the piano running through God Only Knows. I got to really focus on the lyrics with this recording. Really listen to them. I don't know what the hell Surf's Up is about. No one does. But there seems to be a discrepancy. Brian says he felt love while writing it, and everyone else feels great sadness hearing it. This Surf's Up demo is so powerful to me. It's the final brick of Murray Wilson's Surfing Cars and Girls tower coming loose, sending the whole thing falling down. Surf's Up is defiant vulnerability. Oh god. This is really, really hard. Every single version of Surf's Up has its merits. I think that's a sign of a truly great song. It's like Something by the Beatles. You hear George Harrison's demo from the studio, and even then you heard the incredible potential that song has. It's the same case with Surf's Up. If I need a tiebreaker at the end, then I'll leave the decision for then. Until then, this is a draw. I'm in great shape. I want to be around, and workshop. This presents our first great sequencing conundrum. Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE has all three of these songs tacked together, while SMiLE Sessions pops I'm in Great Shape between Plymouth Rock and Barnyard. Then Workshop is in its regular place right after Surf's Up. I don't know why they did that. The Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE version is a wonderful showcase of our backing vocalists. A great crew Brian had on here. It's a cutesy interlude that devolves into a proto-vaporwave thing? Like, where did that fat reverb come from? Okay, these lyrics about wanting to put somebody back together when they're brokenhearted with the little carpentry noises is so sweet. It reminds me of something my grandpa says. He says, I can fix anything, but I can't fix broken hearts, and I can't fix broken bones. And if it's anything I've learned from my time on the internet, it's that you can't fix stupid. On SMiLE Sessions, it's interesting to note that Brian's vocals for this one and Barnyard came from a demo session in '66. It still does that freaky outro. I don't know how they came up with this in '66, but into Barnyard this time? That makes no sense. I have no idea why this was split up. Workshop is wordless, unfortunately, so we don't get the play on the building noises. No wonder this confused me so much when I first heard it, but I do love the little touch of somebody hitting their thumb and going, ow! My verdict: Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE. I'm so glad this was such an easy decision after the last one.
I'm gonna be around my vegetables.
Oh, vegetables. This is one of my guilty pleasure Beach Boys songs. I sing this one to myself while I cook. My dog also loves the scraps of the cucumbers, tomatoes, and carrots when I cut them up, so this song makes me think of him running into the kitchen whenever he hears me taking the cutting board out. Good grief, I cannot believe I had to listen to 3 versions of this song 3 times each while making dinner, no less. I'm unsure which recording, if any, features Paul McCartney chewing on the celery. SMiLE is most likely, but this one is so jarring. Literally nothing about this feels right. Hi, everybody. SMiley Abby. Remember me? Dropping in on this vegetables section. I am so mad that I somehow didn't independently think of this, but this next joke is all my best friend from high school. I can't take credit for this at all. Brian had Paul McCartney come over and chew that celery, supposedly for vegetables, but he never had any intention of using it. That's why it doesn't appear on any of these records, because it was all a bit. Think about it. There's nobody more committed to the bit than Brian Wilson in 1967. I totally think this whole celery thing was just to fuck with Paul. Oh my god, was this revenge for Strawberry Fields Forever? I just unlocked something. My favorite vegetables are cucumbers and sweet potatoes. Thank you for asking. Anyway, my favorite is the SMiLE Sessions. The ukulele is adorable. It's got the heroes and villains motif and some more wayward, wandering vocals. On on a holiday or holidays. We get back to that exotica thing Brian had started with Pet Sounds times 10. We're gonna stay there for a solid minute. The Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE recording is the Roll Plymouth Rock motif's triumphant return. It seems Holiday was really supposed to be a prelude into the Elements suite, but I really don't think this should have been longer than a minute. It does what it needs to do pretty quickly. The SMiLE Sessions version is very similar as far as structure, but there's no lyrics and no Plymouth Rock motif. This version makes me wonder why the Plymouth Rock bit needed to be in here at all. Again, it does just what it needs to do with the instrumentation. We get all we need to from the atmosphere. It's the wackiness and fun of SMiLE plus some pretty ad-libs. Verdict, SMiLE Sessions.
Those are my wind chimes.
Wind chimes. Yes, I'm doubling up on this outfit because I need the next one to be the next one. This is the beginning of what probably would have been the Elements. Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE's version has an unreasonably good double bass. We encounter this jarring soft loud thing. I have to say I was kind of tuning out of this song until then. There's those nice big drums, and as soon as I heard those nice big drums, I knew exactly why they were there. This third side as a whole is where you really start to notice how interwoven Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE is. It's like one big long suite. The Smiley SMiLE version makes me wonder, are these even the same song? This haunted PC rendition fits the Elements vibe much better, at least from what we have of the Elements. Wow, that stop is striking and beautiful, but again, why are we whispering? We're getting a little musique concrète with this one. Yeah, it's probably an unpopular opinion, but I found myself really liking this one. With SMiLE Sessions, we have the same arrangement as Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE, but it meets in the middle with Smiley's vibe. Just as tight, but it better retains that unsettling feeling. Verdict, Smiley. We gotta find a use for this hat after this video. This is too good to use on just one video and then never use it again. The Elements, Fire / Mrs. O'Leary's Cow. Brian made a song so fire that it burned down a fucking building. The Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE version is terrifying. The murmur of the train whistle and lull in the engines before the realization of, oh shit, this is actually really bad. We should get out of here. This song needed the 30+ years for music to get heavy enough to carry it. Those chugging electric guitars are menacing. In those 30 years, though, Mrs. O'Leary's Cow became more about the making of the song than the song itself. The SMiLE Sessions version is very obviously unfinished, and it's spooky knowing why. Verdict, Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE. In Blue Hawaii. I'm sorry, Brian. I'm sorry, Van Dyke. I'm sorry to everyone. This set of lyrics is all sorts of no. Is it hot as hell in here, or is it me? It ruins this whole part of the song. We've jumped right over the devastation after the fire has been put out. Once you get past this, if you can, it's great. The inclusion of the Our Prayer motif at the end hits it out of the park. It's like the coda before the grand finale that is Good Vibrations. SMiLE Sessions is a little bit better without all those lyrics. The arrangement of this one is hair-raising. Those non-verbal ad-libs are spooky, but it doesn't feel like enough of a lead-in to Good Vibrations. Therefore, as much as I hate the first line, verdict is Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE. Finally, Good Vibrations. The Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE version... no. Just no. I get why the lyrics were rewritten, but you just can't beat the original. Sorry, Brian. Sorry, Van Dyke Parks. This has been taken out of the running immediately. Next, the Smiley SMiLE version. This is the one everybody knows. It was the single version. You already know it. It's inventive, it's intricate, lush, late 60s Beach Boys at their very finest. But the Smiley SMiLE version builds Good Vibrations highs even higher. That one extra movement changes everything. This was like hearing Good Vibrations for the first time all over again. Verdict, SMiLE sessions. If you ask me, this is the definitive recording of Good Vibrations. I want to briefly shout out You're Welcome. I love hearing it so much on the SMiLE sessions. It would have been the Your Majesty of SMiLE. So looking at my tally, it seems my overall winner is SMiLE sessions? This surprised me as I really enjoyed Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE as a package. I was rooting for this one to win for the principle of it all, but man, I didn't need to choose between those recordings of Surf's Up. Maybe I subconsciously lean towards SMiLE sessions because it's a Beach Boys project. We have the rest of the Beach Boys on it. I know Brian is a genius and whatever, but what do I always say? The whole is more than the sum of its parts. If you want a cohesive, rounded out version of SMiLE, go Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE. If you want something that's sonically closer to what a 1967 SMiLE would have been, go SMiLE sessions. Now that we've talked about all the songs, I want to give my perspective on some bigger SMiLE questions. Number 1, had it been completed and released in 1967 as intended, would SMiLE have been the greatest pop album ever made? It was ambitious. Sure, SMiLE would have been an incredible feat of humanity had it been completed. But greatest? There was so much stuff happening in 1967, namely this. So much came out of 1967 that proved to be a lot more influential. And importantly, more accessible. SMiLE was dense as hell, years ahead of its time. It's the long one off Abbey Road ×4. For those reasons, I don't think it would have fared as well as Pet Sounds upon release. Number 2, since SMiLE was never completed, how do we handle it? I think we treat SMiLE as something that does not and never will exist. As humans, we have an innate need to quantify things. That's why music critics have done so well with scored reviews. But with something like SMiLE, we can't really quantify it, and that's tough, especially for someone as analytical as me. There are still so many pieces that don't have their place, so many holes that were never filled. What about the skits? What about the elements? How long was this thing even supposed to be? We will never know, and we have to accept it all for what it is. Number 3, do we treat SMiLE as a Beach Boys album at all? The Beach Boys were right. There are some Beach Boys songs here, like Good Vibrations, but SMiLE was never going to be a Beach Boys album. It's quirky, zany, painfully earnest. Grinning your biggest grin with a tear in your eye. That is Brian Wilson. And lastly, number 4. In wake of examining his masterwork, how will Brian be remembered? Firstly, his ear. His arrangements throughout SMiLE, namely Heroes and Villains, Good Vibrations, Cabinescence, are masterful. I'll remember him for his heart. You need a lot of heart, a lot of resilience too, to go after a project as big as SMiLE decades after its conception. SMiLE is an exploration of 2 main themes: the history of America and the human condition. One theme is used to illuminate the other. At worst, it can seem unfinished, nonsensical, a little vague, but at best on songs like Wonderful and Surf's Up. They strike just the same bruised heartstring as Pet Sounds did. This is especially apparent on that devastatingly raw Surf's Up demo. Brian's aged voice might even add to this quality. I wasn't expecting to ugly cry to Wonderful. Though not as pristine as it once was, Brian's voice still carries that tender, heartfelt quality. Again, a resiliency that is so essential to the Beach Boys. That's the word of the day, I think. Resiliency. A question I often ask myself in my lowest moments is, are there still beautiful things? It can be really fucking hard to stay optimistic in this world, but I look at SMiLE, and my answer to that question is yes. It may be naive, but I still believe in the inherent goodness of man. There's a lot of bad out there. It was a scary time to be a young person in the 60s. I can tell you it's a scary time to be a young person in the 2020s. It's okay to be pissed off. It's also okay to see hope. SMiLE is a defiant sense of hope. A sunflower turning its face to the light as the wind is whipping and the rain and snow is coming down. SMiLE is kintsugi, when potters fill the cracks of broken dishes with gold. At the end of the day, SMiLE is a lot more than an album that doesn't exist. It's more than fragments of a never-finished thing glued together with gold. It's an assurance that broken things are beautiful and good triumphs over evil. I swear to God, it does. My personal favorites off this one are Heroes and Villains, Roll Plymouth Rock, Wonderful, Surf's Up, Mrs. O'Leary's Cow, and Good Vibrations. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all of the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it! That is the season 2 finale of Vinyl Monday. I am about to enter my 3rd year total of doing this. The series lived on my Instagram for about a year before I brought it over here. I'm watching this thing, this idea that I had sitting in the college apartment I shared with 5 other people, become real. It's actively taking on a life of its own. I'm along for the ride just as much as you. After working on this video for 3 months, I'm sitting here and wondering, okay, what now? Firstly, I want to thank everyone who made these iterations of SMiLE happen, starting with the man himself, Brian Wilson. You are such an inspiration to all of us dreamers and eternal optimists. You are living proof that it's never too late to make your dreams come true. Thank you to Brian's family and friends, the rest of the Beach Boys, yes, even Mike Love, the Wrecking Crew, the performers on Brian Wilson Presents SMiLE, everyone for bringing SMiLE to life. There's so many people who've contributed to SMiLE over the decades, a huge production behind this never-ending show. Even if I didn't read your name, thank you all. I want to thank all the cool people I've met through being a Beach Boys fan on the internet. Thank you, Giggins, for steering me in the direction of good resources and providing such valuable insight for this video. I want to thank all the creators in this space who saw this crazy Vinyl Monday thing I was doing before it had any kind of traction and appreciated it. Joe from Play That Rock and Roll, the guys from Losing My Opinion, Chris McGovern of the Gen X Muse for being the Nostradamus of this channel. Thank you to my best friend Jackie, one of the original purveyors of the R-swear meme and maybe the only person who believes in Vinyl Monday more than I do. Thanks to my dad for introducing me to the Beach Boys via the Christmas album. I'll have to do a video about that someday. And lastly, I want to thank all 15,000 of you, and counting, that have joined the Vinyl Monday journey since the Season 1 finale, a short 364 days ago. You made this thing possible, so what do you think of SMiLE? What do you think of SMiLE? What do you think of SMiLE? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums I love, and no matter what some guy on the internet might tell you, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11, except for next week. After working on this video for so long in tandem with grinding out your regularly scheduled Vinyl Mondays, I am taking a break. You will still see a video from me in that time, the Vinyl Monday Season 2 bonus episode. That'll either be this Friday or next Monday. It'll be like 20 minutes instead of 30. A lot more chill than this. Vinyl Monday Season 3 will officially kick off on Monday, September 18th with a big album anniversary. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you then. Bye!